Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. We've got a really exciting webinar planned for you guys. We are going to be talking about the financial case for sustainable design and how LCA data shows the return on investment of building green. So that is a topic I know a lot of you are curious about. How can you show the ROI of going green, of building sustainably, and we are going to get into it today. My name is Aileen Carroll. I am in charge of sustainability communications for the US and Canada here at One Click LCA. And I am joined today by David McLean, who is the founder of P3I Global, which you'll hear more about today. Thanks for joining us, David. And I'm also joined today by Leo of One Click LCA. He is an LCA expert here, and he is going to be talking a little bit about One Click LCA and also how he worked with David on this project. Thanks for joining us today, Leo. And now, while we wait just a few minutes before getting started, we're going to let some stragglers trickle in. But I'd love it if you guys could jump down in the chat, let us know where you are joining from. I know we have an audience that's global, and we have a lot of people in the US and Canada. So let us know what city you're joining from, what state, if that applies, and what country as well. So we'd love to hear where you guys are joining in from. And then today's webinar is hosted by One Click LCA. For those of you who are not familiar with One Click LCA, we are the world's leading LCA software for construction and manufacturing. We have an easy-to-use LCA and EPD platform, and we also have all the world's data. So really great platform with a lot of integrations for you to use. We have solutions for over 80 global standards, including LEED v5, Cal Green, the Toronto Green Standard, as well as standards and regulations all over the world. We also have access to the world's largest LCA database with over 300,000 data sets. So you get all the data you need in the platform. And we integrate with over 20 different softwares, including tools that you guys use like Revit and Rhino and Grasshopper. We've been powering the makers of a zero carbon future for over 20 years, and you guys are the makers of a zero carbon future. So thank you for joining us today. And I see we've got some folks from the East Coast, from the West Coast, someone all the way from Germany. So welcome, as well as up in Canada. So glad to have you guys here. And while we are going through the presentation today, if you guys have questions, we are going to be doing a live Q&A at the end. So if you have a question during the presentation, you can go to the chat tab or you can go to the questions tab. You can put your questions there. I'll be monitoring that throughout the program today. And we will ask those questions at the end. So don't hesitate. If you have a question now, you can put it in there right now, or if something comes up as we are going through the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our first presenter, David McLean. If you want to connect with him, this QR code does go to his LinkedIn profile, so you can check that out. And David, I'd love it if you could introduce yourself and kick us off today.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I'm going to turn off my video just to reserve bandwidth here. So my name's David McLean. I'm the founder of P3I Global, previously McMax CX, and also a joint venture partner with ESG Impacts. My role within both of these firms is Chief Impact Assurance Officer. P3I Global and ESG Impacts were formed to accelerate the deployment of mature, readily available, generationally responsible best practice designs, technologies, policies, and capital stack investments within the built environment ecosystem so that we could create safer, healthier, more efficient, and more prosperous places for everybody to live, learn, work, and play. It is our firm belief that, you know, we've created enough best practice designs, enough technologies, enough policies that if they were consistently implemented, that we could solve most of the problems that we have created in the built environment ecosystem. So let's talk. So my role here today is I'm going to talk at the higher level how we have incorporated one-click LCA's solutions into the the initiatives that we put forward to support our clients. But I wanted to make very clear what we perceive to be the built environment ecosystem. So the definition that I use is it's all man-made structures, features, and facilities viewed collectively as the buildings and communities in which we live, learn, work, and play, all the stakeholders and shareholders therein, and the connected natural and human ecosystems upon which we encroach, impact, and alter. So if we take that definition into consideration, I want to talk about what it is that we do to support our clients, what's happening in the areas that we are making money in our for-profit side, but also talk about the advocacy around which we are using one-click LCA and other global tools to accelerate this deployment that I spoke of earlier. So it's no surprise that in the built environment ecosystem, we have investors. Investors, like all investors, want their money to go to the lowest risk and the maximum return on investment projects. The challenge in the built environment ecosystem is that that's not a straight line. And if we want to make that picture clearer for investors to go to those low risk, maximum return on investment projects, then we have to bring in a lot of talented and very technical solution providers like banks, credit agencies, appraisers, brokers, developers, designers, contractors, manufacturers, city planners, code officials, property managers, and obviously the occupants that will be in these buildings, either as you and me, or business tenants, etc. So it's a relatively complicated process, and investors are challenged to feel that they are actually getting that low risk maximum return on investment. So hang on a second, there we go. So as I said, our role, and I have to admit, so we are rather privileged in the fact that most of our clients, as a matter of fact, all of our clients, are engaged in creating projects that are creating greater impact than what I'll refer to as the lowest first cost minimum code solutions that are out there. And I'll get into that in a little bit more. But the reality of it is that we've been building sustainable assets, and I use that with quotation marks. But for the most part, it's recognized that sustainable assets lease faster, they last longer, they cost less to operate, they attract attractive capital. That means that typically they can get relief on rates and the amount of capital that they have to put down. So they have become recognized globally as being of lower risk and higher return on investment. We get into all kinds of discussions around, the nuances around that and what substantiates that. And that brings me to the next slide. So now that investors have recognized that these sustainable assets are more attractive and better places to put their money, There's lots of money out there that wants to go to those assets. But now, in addition to all those professionals and I'll call them obstacles, but opportunities. Now we have sustainability consultants, we have green rating systems, environmental product declarations, life cycle assessments, health product declarations, uh, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And we have to bring more expertise into this process, and investors really get overwhelmed in trying to make sure that the money that they spend is actually creating the impact that they expect. And my role as the chief impact assurance officer is to make sure that my clients don't spend a penny over and above the lowest first cost minimum code that they can't realize the benefits for the life of the asset. So we have the smart money that wants to go to sustainable assets. And simultaneously, we have all of these developers and designers and others out there, manufacturers that want to build sustainable assets, and they want to attract that smart money to them. And that is where all of these professionals reside, and that's where P3I Global and ESG Impacts lives. Now, in the last 30 years of working in the built environment ecosystem, it became pretty obvious that a lot of these sustainability initiatives were only going into Class A office buildings, affluent school systems, or large urban areas. They weren't making their way out into the masses. And so a lot of these solutions were just sitting on shelves. So how do we get them to be deployed consistently? And that has to, I love this saying. I don't know when I heard it years ago, but change happens at the speed of trust. And from our perspective, due diligence is absolutely incredible. And the bar for trust is getting more and more granular all the time. So if you think we're going to stop asking for higher levels of transparency and accountability, you're fooling yourself. And what's happening globally is we really have two economies. We have an economy around real estate assets that understand that building resilient, sustainable projects actually is of more value in the long run than those that are just say, well, that's just a fad, and are building these lowest first cost minimum code projects. So our goal is, how do we create a highest level of trust to show what the value is, not just from a financial perspective, but also from a environmental and social perspective, or creating natural and human asset value. So we created the community-facing free P3I platform, Planet, People, Profit, Impact. That's what P3I stands for. We were very intentional about this not being another green rating system, unless, of course, you consider money being the ultimate green rating system. We wanted this portal, or this platform, to be an opportunity awareness portal. We wanted to be able to speak to anybody in the built environment ecosystem, from investors to school children, in a way that got building science out of the way, or investment strategies, green rating systems, etc. And so we created this platform at the end of this to speak about money. And the process that we created is the process that we basically borrow from anybody that's trying to move an initiative. You have to create awareness. You have to provide some way for this to be internalized by the users. In this case, for good or bad, money is emotionally connected to all of us. We don't have to learn about it. We know what it's worth to us. And most importantly, we had to create a repeatable pathway to action. So, this is a busy slide, but all of the pieces are out there. I have the privilege, like I said, to work with clients that want to do this, and they see the value. So there are best practices out there. There's they are motivated to move their products, be they design or technologies. They see the value. They just don't know how to articulate that. The other part of this is the LFCMC, lowest first cost minimum code models. The marketplace will always win. So let's recognize what 90% of projects are aiming for, and that is their maximum expectation is the lowest minimum requirement. Let me just repeat that. Their maximum expectation is the lowest mandatory legal requirement. That means that they're not interested in doing anything above that. So their fiduciary model does not allow for easy assessment or evaluation of anything above that. And of course, we have to bring that all to materiality. And that's where we use one-click LCA to be able to do this massing. I'll get to that in a minute. Data visualization, obviously around the greenhouse warming potential and life cycle assessment, one-click LCA. Marketplace relevance, the lowest first cost minimum code models that we have created have to be representative, marketplace representative. That means constructible, et cetera. And we have to be able to have an ecosystem storyboard where all of these best practices around these different models are relatable to one another. And then we have created our pathway to action. This platform originally grew out of my engagement as the chair of the Best Practices Committee with the U.S. Green Building Council of Texas, which we have developed a number of best practice champions that we that have made themselves available to other members of USGBC Texas so that anyone looking to can emulate their superpowers. So we do this with marketplace visionaries, best practice champions, but we want to engage with communities in the marketplace. So in essence, this is the hierarchy of the P3I platform. I know it looks busy. What I want to talk about is level one, which are those model types. So if you think about an architect, for example, I don't know any that get out of bed every morning wanting to build a lowest first cost minimum code project. And they're waiting for that developer to come in that says, you know, I have unlimited funds. Tell me what you want to do. I've got an office building and I want to make it as healthy as possible for the inhabitants so that the businesses can be as prosperous as possible. I want it to be beautiful. I want it to be engaged with the community, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, unfortunately, that doesn't happen very often, if ever, for some. So the models that we've built are basically a safe space. Starts off with the lowest first cost minimum code, and then you can start adding best practices to it and see what the environmental, social, and financial dollar value is of that. So we use one-click LCA, and Leo's going to go into great detail on the level of effort that we went into make that granularity transparent. But at its core, those models have to be based on the highest level of due diligence. And that's where the trust comes in, because if we don't have these models dialed in with respect to marketplace relevance, with respect to constructability opportunities, then they're really not going to be reflective of a starting point to be able to understand what the delta is from that lowest first cost minimum code to the value that can be brought by the best practices. So this first level is critical to the success of our platform, and it's critical to the success of what we do in our custom for-profit projects. This model really is a layout of what we do for our clients. It's just put together in a way that users can actually create their own journey of what's important to them. Because just like we do on our for-profit side and on our advocacy side, we want to make sure that we can meet those passionate individuals that want to do better where they're at, instead of having to force them to learn all of these intricate and complicated processes. So this is what the platform looks like. I'm not going to share it today, other than to say that once we've got this platform up here, these building types, we can look at different types of best practices, be they designs, technologies, policies, or capital stack. We can prioritize those best practices by the natural, human, or financial value that they bring, and we can select which ones we want to look at, and we can look at the natural value that they create. We can look at the human value that they create, and we can look at the financial impact, all looking at what the capital stack investment is, et cetera. So we're able to build off of the baseline model that we've created with one-click LCA. Now, I wanted to very quickly say how this model falls into just one example of how we support our clients. So this is a manufacturer onboarding process that we have. So whether we're typically doing this on a for-profit project, but we do work with organizations that are industry organizations to help them message the benefit that they bring. So the process is pretty much the same, but the starting point is you have to create the material data. And so we use one-click LCA to create an environmental product declarations for our clients so that they can not only, have that information to share for designs, but really it's to help clients understand how to meet the market where they're at and emerging opportunities for them. Then we create that lowest first cost minimum code data with one-click LCA and other tools modeling tools that are available out there. The materiality is where we bring in the triple bottom line, and all that gets internalized in our P3I global analysis and reports. And they get put into the platform as examples of what the marketplace is capable of doing. The rest of this are how we actually take those manufacturers through the bid, design, build, bid process to create, again, for a real project, we create custom LCAs. And once the project is successful, then we create a case study that comes back and supports the monetization methodologies that are being used within the program, and are expanding as more marketplace visionaries and best practice champions join us in this initiative to monetize the natural and human and financial asset value that's possible as we create generationally responsible projects. So that is it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Leo, and Leo's going to get into the nuts and bolts of how we actually do this. And it's all yours, Leo.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction to the platform and providing the 2 out of the 3 P's insight. So definitely people and profit taken into consideration. Before we go into the details of the planet, my name, as you can see there on the screen, is Leonardo Poli. I'm an LCA expert working for one-click LCA, and I believe that might also be the QR for my LinkedIn. If not, just type my name in, I'll be happy to connect. Right, so getting straight into the planet conversation, starting with how we managed to do the work that we did. And it's fair to say that one of the functions of one-click LCA that was pivotal in achieving the outcome that has been achieved, essentially combining the people, planet, and profit all under the P3I platform that was just presented by David, was in fact through a tool that is known as Carbon Designer 3D, which is part of the one-click LCA toolbox. Now, simply put, one-click Carbon Designer 3D is an application that runs on the side of one-click LCA. This is used to generate buildings and LCA in seconds, mostly speaking for early carbon optimization. So early, in fact, that you could ideally even use Carbon Designer 3D to set a design brief to then kind of give back to your client, give back to your investors, give back to your design team to already set the record straight on what our objectives are and where the low-hanging fruits are, where we should be focusing our efforts on. So as you can see there, it easily generates reference buildings and design options. It provides carbon hotspots, materials and building parts. So that's really important to highlight because it goes to a level of granularity that, as David already highlighted, is something that is kind of required when it comes to investment. If any of you have ever seen Shark Tank or the Dragon's Den, one of the main things that comes through whenever there is an opportunity to invest in is what sort of risk are associated with that investment. And that's exactly why it's so important to showcase that level of granularity, because the audience is not going to be satisfied with an overview or a bird's eye view. The other thing that you can also do is also compare alternative and also compare impacts of different structural systems, assembly, and specific products and more. And you can see that we're going into a bit more of a detailed look at how we could reduce the impacts of certain building elements or even materials within the design. In terms of what insights you're going to be getting, you're obviously going to see the overall impacts, so the total carbon impacts, the carbon hotspots, and the carbon reduction or increase. You're also going to be visualizing the carbon impacts by building parts, classification, materials, and components. So that's very, very useful for targeting your conversation whenever you're talking to an engineer, whenever you're talking to a designer, whenever you're talking to the lead architect. And then obviously data-driven design decisions, which is to some extent is kind of related to what we're talking about in the first place. That data is required for investors, for shareholders, for clients or developers to push that initiative onto, the financial related individuals to make these decisions. So the data is as important as a way to visualize and as a way as getting the or as important as also the overall visualization and results of the carbon impacts. So then in terms of the business benefits, obviously directly related to carbon as an 3D, you can obviously do some quick baseline and building creation. You can enable fast LCA, so any sort of calculation that asks you to consider retainment of different structures and different elements. Thinking of the GLA in London. Apologies, I'm UK based, so I'm kind of just thinking of different situations in which it is expected to assess the impact of retaining certain elements that are already existing on site. And it's very easy to do that through carbon designer 3D and running through different optimizations solutions, and then ultimately even comparing against a knocking down and demolition of all the elements on site and then building brand new. And within all of this, you can then obviously identify the optimal decarbonized solutions for your project, which might not be a straightforward answer, but it might be, as most things, landing somewhat in the middle. It's never black or white, is usually some shade of gray. And that's important. This is so important to get right as early as possible. Obviously, you can also generate quick LCA, which provides you with a quick baseline for the building. You can see there are some visualizations that you are going to have access to when using Carbon Designer 3D. So it also helps you to then generate quick graphs that you can present to any design team or any board members. And as I already mentioned, renovations versus new build is one of those things that really comes to mind immediately, especially in those areas where maybe now more and more we're starting to get requirements on circularity, maybe reusing building stocks as Lego bricks, if you allow me that parallelism. And also, arguably speaking, as the supply chain becomes less and less reliable, speaking from a Euro-centric, if you will, position that I'm in, I'm already seeing in a number of different, panels, in a number of different legislations that are being put forward, whether they are in draft format or they are in for revision. There is definitely the need to establish a more circular supply chain to have less reliability on international supply chains that, as hopefully hopefully not you've come across, but hopefully you've realized, is something that is becoming more and more of a situation. Obviously, renovation versus new build is something that is quite important, and that can also be done using Carbon Designer 3D, doing quick material data quantities, comparison for existing structures without having detailed plan, again, by showcasing the low-hanging fruits, and also estimating the quantities for refurbishment and for expansions. So really lots of flexibility to, most importantly, as we said, approach these conversations as early as possible when engaging your design team, ideally even before the design brief has been decided. Another one is that another benefit of the Carbon Designer 3D is also to fill the gap in material information or material quantities. Too many times, in a design process, we've all come across situations where you do have part of the information maybe provided by architects, maybe provided by the structural engineers, maybe provided by the MEP engineers, but then part of the information is missing. Maybe part of the consulting firm that has been engaged has not been able to issue the final set of documentation for whatever reason, maybe even from a prioritization coming from the client. Now, that obviously would represent a limitation to your ability to represent the full design. That is not the case with Carbon Designer 3D, because you can really pick and choose depending on what your specific needs are of what elements of the design for your building you're going to be generating using historic data that's coming from Carbon Designer 3D and one-click LCA. And most importantly is that here we're not talking about simple benchmark that you're going to be scaling up and down depending on the size of your building. We're talking about a as bespoke as possible MEP system, structural system, facade system, which are all being generated for you for the specific shape of the building. And most importantly, you can edit and change to fit the change in design as you move through your design stages. Finally, you also have the opportunity of generating model portfolios. So you can even save a Carbon Designer 3D as a template, which is to become a building portfolio, and regenerate these building iteratively and really improving on that process. You can already hopefully see the number of different opportunities that we have here. They go from ESG reporting, they go from portfolio and analysis, they go to then into the conversation of financial analysis. It's just much better when you can develop with consistency these your portfolio, scale it up or down depending on what your specific requirements are, and make edits to showcase the potential improvements associated with your portfolio after sustainability design has been applied. And then finally, apply materials to the whole building model, and then comparing specific products to industrial averages is also something that you can do. Now, hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavor of what Carbon Designer can be used for. In this particular exercise, we used it in the what the business case study was for the creation of a whole new building. But actually what we've done, as I'm going to be showing right now, and as already highlighted by David, we've gone through number of different conversations to really pinpoint the best way to build that trust and really build that reliance that maybe any user of the software P3i would be requiring to push that conversation moving forward. And I think really, as already David explained, the trust is a pivotal part of any conversation, more specifically so if we're talking about money, more specifically so if we're talking about investments that are going to be living into our technosphere for the next 60 years, aka buildings. Now, starting with some building consistency, you can interpret this as consistency of the building or building the consistency as we build the model. I think it's quite interchangeable. Simply what we did is, or what we were trying to do is to align Carbon Designer 3D model with the P3i specifications. This obviously started with the development of the baseline, where was the baseline model for a typical office and school, where we basically met and we tried to align the bill of quantity that was generated by Carbon Designer 3D in line specifically with the existing bill of material or bill of quantities and materials list that was available under David's P3i platform. All of this was done within a code compliance for UX Texas building. So it was established by Carbon Designer 3D through obviously the iterative process that we just talked about. So there were some things that we had trust on, for example, the R value and the U value of your envelope, the minimum compressive strength of your structural systems, and all of those aspects that are for safety required. On top of that, as already explained, we went past that point and we actually aligned as much as possible the planet model with the profit and the people model that David already had within the P3i platform. Now, as you can imagine, P3i, aka David and myself, one-click LCA, met multiple times to review and improve the accuracy and alignment of the planet baseline with the people and profit. This is to link and demonstrate the carbon, social, and financial burdens associated with the minimum code design. The following then was reviewed. The following was reviewed for the baseline starting point. So this is what we and David have gone through on top or after the Carbon Designer 3D model was generated. The only way that we could have done this is thanks to Carbon Designer 3D, where there was the opportunity, as already mentioned, to rerun the design a number of different times and see the impacts associated with that reworked design without too much work. In fact, most of the time that me and David spent was actually discussing, talking, and see how we could set up the baseline in such a way that it would not only align to the people and profit models, but also to spark interest from the users that would eventually use it. So obviously everything starts with the geometry, where we reviewed the area, the floors above and below ground, the footprint, the overall height, and the ceiling height. So anything that was associated with the quantities that would go into the building. Next thing was the structural design. So within that fixed design, what is the most representative solution for what we're trying to do? Is it a concrete? Is it a steel? Is it a hybrid frame? What type of concrete? Is it okay with this, with the assumptions that we have, like column spacing, like the slabs, like the core design? Is there enough locations for stairs? Is it usually more complex, or is it more? Does it have more core designs? Is it okay? Is it representative of what the people will eventually have on site or are trying to get on site? What we settled on is a column spacing which was fairly typical, 7.5, with a concrete design and a number of different assumptions that we're not going to go into for the slabs that were, as we already mentioned, fully representative of the typical minimum building compliance building. We then went on to the building elements of technology, like the cladding materials, the roof finishes, the internal and external doors materials, and the MEP system. So basically, if you will, is like coloring a white and black, drawings. We drew the drawing, we defined the geometry, we defined the systems for the structural design, but it was still black and white. We didn't have any materials associated with it, specific materials and technologies. And again, that was needed to be representative of the US market, of the market that we were trying to target to gain traction with the audience. So what we see here, we, for example, reworked the cladding materials for a number of different iterations. Roof finishes were all edited, internal and external door materials were edited. And then, as already mentioned, the MEP system, which is kind of a conversation on its own. If there's any MEP system engineer, you already know how complex that can be and how kind of to some extent titanic of a task this is. But again, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're not trying to make everything exactly perfect. We're just trying to make everything as reasonable and as representative so that people can then bring back this model and have a conversation with their investors or with the people that are essentially making the decision. So again, this was to appropriately link planet, people, and profit. So this was a fully electrified MEP system, both for our office and for our school. The other thing that we were also trying to do is to have a relatively representative embodied carbon impact with the operational energy consumption on average for a new build in the US. The use of constructions was also made for MEP systems, meaning that now, this is another functionality of one-click LCA. Constructions were created. We were reviewing this construction, editing the different elements of the construction, and then scaling up or down these constructions to review the impact that they would have on the full design. And what we settled is, as already mentioned, a fully electrified system, relatively simple for a school and a bit more complex for an office. And again, this was to give that confidence on the baseline. Finally, on top of that, we also did some model additions. So there were some items that obviously David wanted to add to the design, rightfully so, to fully encapsulate not only the opportunity for reduction for the main building items, but also to carry a bit of a narrative that would not only link design to or design initiatives to our model, but also potentially link off-the-shelf available materials in the US with the carbon reductions associated with the model. So there was a bit of a foresight, if you will, on how the setting up of the specific materials and additional modeling items to then push that conversation to allow people to get access to these readily available materials. So FF&E for school and office was added. We added interior acrylic paints. We added finishes, external overground parking areas, but only for the office, again generated for with Covenant and 3D, and then hard landscaping. And again, these additions were to represent the full building impact, as you can see there, and have a more holistic carbon profile and reductions, but also to make a clear link between different items that go into a building and potential existing off-the-shelf solutions. And in fact, off-the-shelf is one of the things that we were trying to do all throughout the assessment. We didn't go above and beyond. We didn't go to, super technical materials, but we were trying to basically represent elements that were available or solutions that were available to everyone, because as already mentioned by David, bespoke solutions are developed by bespoke clients that tend to have no problem, coughing up a few more millions for the development to go a certain direction. But that's the 1% of the construction industry. The 99% are the one that needs to be incited to go to their procurement team and say, I've heard this is good and I can demonstrate this is good. Can we please source it without additional complications? And that was very much the effort that we were trying to put in when showing reductions, and then ultimately building trust by allowing them to have these conversations with confidence. So we basically approached this with two solutions, a better solution and a best solution. David very correctly pointed out that yet another way to get even more traction within the market was to align to what is known as LEED v5, soon to be released, and more specifically align with the LEED scope. Now, why would you want to align with the LEED scope? Well, LEED is already a name that exists. People already know what it is, and it kind of already knows or resonates with people as a way to reduce carbon emissions and also save money. So what we did is to only include reductions within the LEED scope, so foundations, frame, and envelope. We changed the concrete from a generic 10% Portland cement replacement to a 40% Portland cement replacement. And then we showed reductions of a LEED scope improvement in the context of a full building scope, so a whole life carbon assessment. A reduction between 13 to 10% were found between the office and the school respectively. And most importantly, this was a way to, as we said, showcase that LEED is a good way to gain traction. We get people talking about it. But then secondly, the LEED doesn't paint the full picture, because you will be interested to know that both of these achieved a minimum 20% reduction as expected by LEED. But obviously LEED reduces the scope. In the context of a full building, you can see the reductions were a little bit less. So again, building that trust and allowing people to see the full picture and act on it. And then the next step was to develop the best. This is where things get a little bit more interesting. We're trying to go above that minimum compliance. We're trying to go above that LEED v5 requirements. We had the objective of modeling additional reductions on top of the concrete replacement. And then we looked directly at FF&E and MEP, which we decided to reduce by 10% thanks to optimized replacement cycle and reduced MEP peak capacity. Now, reductions aligned and are all aligned and achievable with off-the-shelf solutions, so much so that some of these solutions don't even rely on the use of off-the-shelf solutions. But the good thing is that the quantitative results associated with these reductions were all clearly displayed. So you can get there by doing the things that we did or by doing different things yourself. But again, that gives you the opportunity of showing that reduction and achieving that reduction. That came in the form of an additional 3.5% of carbon reductions compared to the better model, roughly speaking for both, and then a 16% carbon reduction compared to the baseline in the context of a whole life carbon assessment. So again, really important to highlight, if anything, that 60% reduction, that even when applying all of these solutions, which again, were the minimum thing that you can do with the technology that we have available, we're still only really affecting 16% compared to the baseline. But what we're also really trying to show is that 60% is there to be enacted on for the 99% of the people that have yet to take their first step in the sustainability realm. And if we can do that, I think then we can be quite proud of trying to at least decarbonize by a little bit, but a big part of the construction industry. So I think that's everything from me. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Leo, for that presentation. Super insightful. Thank you both for all of that information. We have a few questions from the audience, so we're going to get to those. But before we do that, I have a question for the audience. And, with everything that you've heard today, you might be interested in, using Carbon Designer 3D, doing a life cycle assessment, and learning more about the P3I platform. So I am going to post a poll. You'll see it appear on your screen. And if you would like to book a demo with a one-click LCA expert, just go ahead and click yes. And then if you are not ready right now, you can say not right now, and you can visit oneclicklca.com to learn more. And I'm going to drop that link in the chat, as well as the link to the P3I platform as well, so you guys can check these out. And David and Leo, feel free to drop any links in the chat if you've got some places for our audience to go. And with that, thank you guys for that. I will go ahead and get to the questions. So the first one just came in. This is a question just about what you were just presenting, Leo. So I'm going to ask it, which is, what was the baseline? And the question is, was it the LEED standard that was the baseline, or what did you use for that baseline model? I think the LEED was the better. So what was that baseline model based on?
Yeah. So that baseline is essentially speaking, the business as usual representation of a school and an office. We use Carbon Designer 3D, as already mentioned, which uses historic data to align with the minimum code compliance building. Then what we also did, and that was shown in the presentation, is we also had conversations with David to make sure that baseline was in fact aligned with what the market was going to build, say, this year and next year. So the baseline is really a combination of business as usual generated with Carbon Designer 3D, and, if you will, a more geographically relevant update that we've done to that baseline to align to what David has required. When it comes to LEED, I really wanted to specify that LEED is only we only took the scope from LEED. We didn't take any specifications for LEED. The scope is simply to represent that LEED is a good way to initiate your conversation towards sustainability and sustainable development, but it's a bit of a narrow view. And then also, as already mentioned, I think it was great from David to the insight to use LEED and the relevance that LEED has within the market to get that traction and really say, I know LEED, I know what they do. How come they're using LEED to demonstrate carbon reductions? I wonder what they're doing, and really then kind of shade the grounds a little bit and say, well, actually, starting from your baseline, going into a LEED narrow restricted scope of improvements, what are the whole life carbon results associated with that reduction? Which, has already highlighted, if you only reduce concrete emissions for a LEED compliant scope, you can get 20% reduction very quickly. But then that reduction tends to be watered down a lot more when you take into consideration the whole building. And that's exactly what we're trying to demonstrate here. So hopefully this clarified the conversation around LEED and the generation of the baseline.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Leo. And David, this question is for you. Have you seen any investor expectations evolving in relation to embodied carbon or lower carbon buildings? Are you seeing that that kind of data is being asked for, or is this still kind of early days for the market?
Yeah, so there's a direct influence and an indirect influence. So most design firms that I work with are requiring any of the materials of construction that are coming onto their projects to have environmental product declarations. Now, an EPD, an environmental product declaration, does not guarantee that it's a low carbon alternative, but it gives the designers the ability to model those different materials and determine what it is that they can do. And the ones that I work with are the major firms globally. They have started to develop those internal skills. We do that. Like I said, we create environmental product declarations, and one of the reasons that we created the P3I platform was because these EPDs are being created and thrown out into the ether, and with the hopes that they'd land on somebody's software package that knew how to do a life cycle assessment. Well, we created these agnostic marketplace representative models specifically to be able to take that EPD data and apply it in a real world scenario so we could see what that was. So the designers are requiring it. Manufacturers are aware that they have to start looking at the greenhouse warming potential of their products. And investors have, not in Texas, but globally, investors are demanding that their money that travels to these sustainable, I call them generationally responsible. I think sustainability gets kind of greenwashed a lot, but we're making generationally responsible decisions, and we need to be making sure that we're investing in projects that are doing the least amount of harm. And the investors that are working with the designers that I work with are all asking for that level of due diligence. We automatically do life cycle assessments on all our projects. LEED V5, it's a prerequisite to do life cycle assessment on all of the structural and envelope and horizontal hardscape elements. So we've just decided we're going to do it because we want to get that good at it and be able to, on any of our projects, renovations, brand new, be able to always speak to the carbon decarbonization opportunity.
Great, thank you for that. I have another question for you, David. Oops, I don't need to make my screen full. Which is, can you talk a little bit more about how you specifically discuss the ROI of embodied carbon reductions? And this person pointed out that with operational carbon, it's a lot easier to point to some of those financial incentives and savings, but it's a little bit harder with embodied carbon. So do you have any tips?
Yeah, so like all of these initiatives, they all get looked at on a very individual myopic focus, right? So embodied carbon, operational carbon, everybody gets excited for a period of time, and then the market, levels out when they understand what the opportunity is. There is a cost of carbon, right? And there's a voluntary carbon market out there. And the nice thing about buildings is that we can, with tools like one-click LCA, we can absolutely quantify the amount of embodied carbon that we have avoided by using materials of construction in a project. And the materials are just part of it, because you also have the methods of construction. So some materials may have lower carbon impact, but they require more effort, more energy, more labor, more time to do it. So you have to look at those too. You have to look at how fast can you get the project up and ready and getting income coming in. You have to look at what happens at the end of life with that. How long does that particular product last? Just because it has a low carbon doesn't mean it has a longer life cycle. So all of these things have to go into that. But for a built environment, we call this, we call it embodied carbon in a building environment, an engineered carbon. because we can measure exactly what it is that we're putting in compared to that lowest first cost. This is critical on building this lowest first cost minimum code deal, because what's the marketplace doing, right? Here's the typical type of concrete, rebar. They don't spend a lot of whatever is the cheapest that they can put in there legally and meet the code requirements. That is what they're going to put in. That's the baseline that we then can compare that embodied carbon savings. We can document that with one-click LCA through the contract documents and submittal information. We can do that. We tighten up the life cycle assessment at the end of the project. We have as-built drawings. We have everything signed off by professionals, engineers, architects, etc. You wrap that up with a nice little bow, and here's the amount of avoided carbon that this project was able to generate. There's a marketplace for that. So we're in the process of developing that marketplace with other voluntary carbon markets, and in some cases we'll buy that carbon. Right now, because there's not a market, as long as we get ownership of that carbon, we can tie it with a nice bow and potentially sell it in the future at a higher market. So there's all kinds of stuff swirling out there, but we have all the tools. We've fallen into it just by the services that we've always provided through the predictive analytics, project stewardship, and ongoing validation of performance. We've captured all of that already. So hopefully that long-winded answer answered the question.
Yeah, well,
can I just jump in as well real quick on this? Because I think it's not the first time that someone mentions operational carbon as being obviously something that's very well understood and very easy to sell, but let's then use it as a trampoline to make a parallelism with embodied carbon, right? So embodied carbon, operational carbon is easy to show the reduction because the benefit builds up over 60 years, and you're kind of forced by default, because that's how the whole use of the building and the specification of the MEP timing is set up. You design the MEP, and then you have to wait a certain amount of time to showcase those reductions. So inherently, you are planning for the reductions. You're applying an MEP that is whether electrified, it's lower peak demand. You basically build for a low operational carbon. Let's now go to a situation where instead I build a building that is not electrified, is not set up to have a low MEP, but then towards the end of the life of the building, I decide to electrify it. And then I expect to see a return of investment on what it seems from the endpoint, a fully electrified system, but I only had 2 years to build that return of investment. Now, what we're doing right now with sustainability in the embodied carbon is electrifying at the end of the life of the building, because we don't have to think about the optimization at early stages. And that's why it's so important to use tools like Carbon Designer 3D, doing an analysis of life cycle assessment and ingraining sustainability as early as possible. Because if we don't do that, it's exactly like electrifying a building at the last 5 years of its life, and then expecting that fully electrified building is now something that I can show reductions on. Sustainability is not built on, it's built in. And operational carbon, the parallelism hopefully works with that conversation, because as we said, you have to plan for low carbon emissions on operational, because that's how the return on investment work. With sustainability, it's all squished together within the design process. So you really need to approach this as early as possible, just like you would electrify your building at year 1, not at year 59, and then after the 1 year it gets demolished. Otherwise it doesn't work. So hopefully that helps to rationalize the embodied carbon conversation in relation to operational carbon, because operational carbon is obviously very well understood.
Great, thank you for that. Hopefully that gives you guys some good tools in your toolbox to go out there and make the case for generationally responsible building, as David put it. I like that phrase, and I'm going to start using it. And thank you guys so much for joining us today. Thank you, David, very much for your time, and Leo as well. Thank you guys for your presentations.
Thank you very much.
Great, and that will wrap it up for today, but we will see you all on the next webinar. Bye.